Hey there, thanks for joining us here, Simply Worldbuilding. Today we're going to have a quick glance over and sort of just flesh out more of an identity, a vibe, a sort of theme for some other areas over here on our second continent, in the same way that we had kind of filled in some of the blank space over on our first continent. And today we were thinking about doing this big old desert.
Yeah, we do have the desert region that you had kind of previously seen here. We had talked a little bit about it, just fleshing out some sort of ideas, but yeah, the ideas we're going to dive in a little bit more thoroughly. I know the civilization that is positioned within the desert was sort of initially your idea. What sort of stuff did you have that you wanted to maybe use to expand on the idea a little bit?
For this thing, I had envisioned it being basically like the last remaining civilization in this desert. I had pictured having previous civilizations as well that had fallen and risen. But basically like the last bastion of like survivable civilization in this vast desert, being just kind of on this peninsula out here, and being a truly like mega city. Very, very wealthy, very like large and like ornate. I had kind of just a few ideas for like the vibe that I kind of wanted to like project, and that is these like big archways, like huge archways that are like towering above where like these, you know, probably still smaller sailing vessels, but vessels can just straight up like go through these big gateways.
Oh, they're in the water?
Yeah, well, yes and no. I want them to be built like along the water, absolutely. Because I think that they're also going to be huge for like trade and stuff like that. Yeah, I want them to be like very along the water. This is actually one of the places where I was thinking that like canals was going to be a big thing, and like not quite in the same way that we were talking about for Fyros.
Yeah.
Like I had actually mentioned for the capital city in Fyros there. The idea of like these canals where people can kind of sail through and do their trading and stuff like that. But that's more by like smaller boats, like canoes and that kind of thing. Yeah. Like just little like, you know, hand projected vessels.
Yeah, like it's a 1 to 4 man boat basically.
Yeah, exactly. But this being like big.
Yeah.
Like big docks, big like everything. And just like all of the other architecture also following that same thing where it's big. It's ornate, it's old, it's lavish. Like there's huge towers, there's like, you know, a mega palace and stuff like that, being a very, very wealthy place. Yeah. Very like dusty. Yeah. But just very, very wealthy with the backdrop of like an enormous like wasteland of desert.
Yeah.
Fun little juxtaposition there.
Yeah, totally. So a lot of theming of just like big when it comes down to big structures, big decoration, big. So on these arches, I'm still a little confused on them. So like how are you picturing, like where are you picturing them exactly? Because you said on the water, not.
Yeah, so like for instance on the entrance to like their harbor, they might just have like a big ass archway that kind of goes over the harbor that they could like, you know, blockade or something like that if somebody were to try and attack. Or
so it's got like a gate on it, or like,
I don't necessarily think that there would be a gate, but actually now that you mention it, I do kind of picture it being like, let's say that they were to have to like defend from boats. I don't think that they would have like a gate, because, you know, moving a ginormous gate is intense. It's cool, but I was thinking like maybe from both sides they could like pull up this net soaked in oil, light it on fire, and then like good luck getting your wooden boats through that now. So effectively a gate, but no like physical like metal bar gate. But just like a big ass archway that covers like the harbor and stuff like that. You have to go through there. It's kind of a choke point. Collect taxes if somebody's not allowed, like pirates, you know, you're like, no, you guys can't come through, like you've got this defendable archway. And then like everything beyond that is just like population, city, ornate, big architecture. Like,
totally.
Built very much with like just the water, fancy architecture and stuff like that, and like old stuff. With the backdrop of like the arid desert.
Totally. Let us in the arch. No, you're smelly. Go away. Are you thinking like multiple of these arches, or mostly just to do with like the water entrances?
Definitely multiple. Like you know, they might have one that's like less, like, because if it's going to cover the entire harbor, that would be truly enormous.
Yeah, that's like huge even on the map.
Yeah, but it could be actually like part of like an aqueduct or something like that, and like one of the openings underneath the aqueduct could be, you know, part of that, like that archway, but something like that. And then when you get a little closer in, like to actually get into the city, there's bigger, more sturdy ones and stuff like that.
So you see that as being a bit of a theme in architecture, almost.
Yeah.
Almost all the way through.
Grand, like doorways and stuff like that, and big towers and lots of staircases and stuff like that.
Interesting.
I want to be a stair-heavy city. I don't know why, but in my head, I was just picturing a lot of stairs.
Yeah, just not very wheelchair-friendly.
No, unfortunately not. Sorry, guys. They got magic.
Yeah, fair enough. They'll probably have...
They'll sort it out.
Yeah, exactly.
Elevators and stuff, too. But...
Oh, dude, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just rolling up in your ancient desert city. But okay, yeah, that's an interesting idea to have a bit of an architectural motif like that. I would want to. I'm curious what we could do with like the reasons for that as well, because like you say, like themes on that are like doorway is sort of an obvious one as well, or it could be some sort of religious symbol to them or something like that. It'll be interesting. I don't have any ideas for it, but it's just an interesting thing that we could kind of hook onto for later. Absolutely. But yeah, so just huge. And like you also said, like ancient architecture as well. And so is it going to be kind of a mix of old and new as well, or is it just like this place has been there would have to be some like obviously modern built buildings, but I think is it like old great monuments with like smaller city built around it, or are they still building these gigantic monuments? Or
I think kind of both. Like I also did picture that like it's one large city that also has like, because I'm not really picturing there being any more than one city here, but it can kind of sprawl out, and then like, you know, what in like North America, like you just have a suburb attached to like Houston or something like that. But instead of like a suburb somewhere else, there's like new grand architecture. But I definitely want it to all be very grand, and also kind of hard to tell, like other than maybe like the palace. All right, we had technical difficulties, but we're back.
Back, baby.
If I've said something twice, my bad. So what I was mentioning was that I kind of wanted to have like a juxtaposition of like the sort of dirtiness of like both the new and the old things. But like maybe minus just like the palace, like the whole town will just be like sandblasted, like construction paper beige. And then
construction paper.
And then like the ivory white towers of the palace will be like completely a stark contrast to that, and whether that's by like magic or just like a lot of like paid labor or whatever,
or interns.
Yeah, exactly. But I want it to kind of have like that juxtaposition as well with like everything just kind of like new or old looks ancient, minus like the tower which just looks bougie. So that's kind of what I was thinking for that.
So what that immediately makes me think of the sort of contrast between the quote unquote sandblasted rest of the civilization and the palace being so clean. Is there going to be kind of a big separation between like the rich and the poor in this place, do you think?
Yeah, I think that like there's gonna be like a lot of wealth, but that there's kind of like a bit of a barrier to entry. Like there's gonna be quite a few people who can't afford to say get into global shipping and stuff like that. So there's still gonna be definitely like, you know, the peasantry, the working class, the farmers and stuff like that. But I do think that there's going to be like quite also like a vast array of wealth. Like a lot of people are very wealthy, but that maybe it's not necessarily that easy to
become
wealthy.
Almost a bit of a caste system where it's like you're virtually born into one or the other. But I get the feeling you kind of also end up with the like, well, you picked a great place to be poor. You know what I mean? It's like everything. There is this grand architecture, and it seems like access to food and water within the city seems like it's going to be, you know, accessible to people, and so it feels like the level of squalor is going to be low. But yeah, there's going to be a large. I wouldn't call them a middle class. They're still peasants, but it's like, yeah, you're not going to be fighting for your life or
dying
for
in the
food.
streets or
Exactly, but yeah, it does feel
like
the border between is going to be not easy to break.
Yeah, I think that like there's going to be a lot of people that are very wealthy and like wear a lot of colors and stuff like that to show that. And then like, you know, if you were to leave all of your bills and your life behind and go like join a ship or something like that you could make up that money to then kind of do your own thing. So like it's not impossible to access, but like if you're kind of born into it and like are just like there is sort of like a level of like getting stuck that I think kind of exists anywhere. But I do want it to be like in general quite a wealthy place.
Yeah, totally.
But also like you said, like you may be still in like, you know, kind of like the slums of this place, but it's still pretty nice.
Yeah,
like it's still pretty nice.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah, I can totally picture that. Yeah, I mean, kind of gives me an idea of exactly how it's supposed to feel around here. But yeah, it's just why I mentioned the palace just as an idea, because it visually presents that stereotype, or not stereotype, but it presents that idea visually of like this sort of separation, which is why I asked.
And I was also thinking that like this is going to be like an old place.
Yeah.
Like there were multiple, like this was probably part of an old civilization. Actually, this brings me to another point, but it was part of an old civilization where like kind of the rest of it fell, but this place was kind of like the last bastion of that. And so it succeeded and stayed. And then like more and more people came, and so like it kind of grew from like a city and a couple of towns into like just one big city. And so like in the old quarters, there's a lot of just like ancient stuff that is really built tight together because it wasn't meant for that many people. And then the main city is like old, and it's got all this old architecture. But then like there's been a lot of new stuff that's like being built around it.
So are you saying sort of, when you mention that, it makes me think that like so this place blew up because it was the place to flee to?
Kind of like in old times, like that is kind of where that came from. And then a lot of people have come here from other places for other reasons.
Well, yeah, like history has happened since, but
your great grandpappy may have been in like this old place and had fled, and then like now you're 10 generations down and you don't really know that. But that is probably why like a lot of people would have been there. Like, but that is one thing I was thinking, if you don't
continue.
Okay, cool. Was that, what do you think, like, because I'm cool with this having always been a desert. That makes sense to me.
Okay. That was going to be a question. I was like, was the cataclysm what made it into a desert, or is there something else? Oh
man, I got a bunch of things. Okay, first off.
Yeah.
You had mentioned previously that you like the idea of like kind of the shifting sands and stuff like that, and like,
totally.
Occasionally like revealing bits of like an old shattered civilization.
Yeah, totally. Well, if there is all this big and grand and cool architecture, this is probably all that's like left or maintained or like even revered or like just kept track of. But like the idea that just one time like an explorer goes out into the desert and another gigantic monolith or something cool like that is just revealed slowly is like, oh shit, like history's beneath your feet in this place.
And so I wanted to say real quick that that's kind of what I want. Like that old architecture is the same thing that you can see in this city because it was from whatever this like old place was. And then this has been maintained and like more stuff has been built and stuff on top of it with the crazy amount of wealth that is in this city. But then I was also thinking like, if it was always desert, that's cool with me. I like that. I think it should have always been desert.
Okay.
What was it that made it a scary desert, and what was it that sort of collapsed the old civilization that was there to leave these ruins behind that are kind of being exposed?
Okay, so
I think it's just time and shifting sands, like just as it is, or do you think that there was some sort of event?
This brings me to basically the one idea I did have about this place, and so I'm gonna rewind a little bit to. Going back over to the triplet cities.
I was so scattered, so feel free to latch on to whatever you...
No, it's just I want to bring this up because it's something that we mentioned earlier with sort of the history of the triplet cities, and I'm not sure if we're still like nailing that down as canon, but the idea that there was just some sort of titan that sort of split the land with like their trident or something like that. But when we say titan, you picture like a humanoid.
Yeah.
And so one thing I was going to kind of ask is, are we going to make some sort of, is there going to be like a distinction? Are all of these Leviathans going to be similar, or are there, or of the same type, or are there going to be like titans versus like beasts? Are they going to be different types of things? Because when we were talking about the triplet cities, I didn't really picture this thing as basically one of these sort of Leviathan kaiju creatures. I pictured it as a giant thing,
yeah,
but almost in a different way.
I agree.
In sort of the difference between like Leviathan in like biblical mythology versus Kronos in Greek mythology. Like, they're very different things. And so that was a question I wanted to ask, because it feels like an important distinction for what I was going to lead into on the desert.
So I definitely also pictured it being a big humanoid that was not related to these things.
Yeah.
I actually pictured it as being prior, or like before this was ever at the level of like danger that it was before. Like, I assume that in our world, like, these things have kind of always existed, because they're kind of tied into like the system of magic in this world.
Yeah, totally.
So I think they would have still been around, but maybe not as rampant as they are now, like with these things spilling out of this, you know, core, this vortex, whatever.
Yeah.
But I did picture them being separate. I did picture them being like maybe inadvertently tied in with like sort of like pantheon and like gods and deities and stuff like that. Like, I think that there's something to be said about maybe these things having been against these like Leviathan creatures. Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally.
Something that you, yeah.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to ask about, and I had initially pictured it as well too, is that we could go with sort of what similar to Greek mythology, and the fact that the Titans are basically the old gods.
Yeah.
And you can even see this in a lot of religions I've found, is that just like the giants, or like the Titans, the whatever was the big people, are like the old gods, or the people before people were. And so I do kind of like the idea that that before any sort of humanoid races existed, there was probably like this war between Titans and the beasts of the land as well, and it formed the very landscape that we that exists currently. And so if that's the idea we wanted to go with, the idea that I had for the desert, because I'm picturing an obvious inspiration from ancient Egypt when it comes down to just this place, like,
yeah,
cool,
kinda, yeah.
Well, just big monuments, ancient history, stuff like that. And so
yeah, so real quick, the sort of the inspiration in my brain, I think, kind of came from like ancient Egypt, and like maybe not the Ottomans, but you know, whatever was in that zone previously, like that kind of like architecture, that sort of thing.
Yeah, totally. And thinking about this, and thinking about some sort of cataclysm that may have occurred long ago, it may have even been after like most of the sort of Titans, quote unquote, were sort of wiped out. And I'm picturing like how you picture like most Egyptian gods, like they have like some sort of like animal head or something like that, but picturing them absolutely gigantic. And so what if before, in this desert, this was sort of the land of the Titans?
Yeah.
Or the ones that remained, and they ruled over this place, or this land in one way or another, which would also explain sort of what the level of prosperity and monuments of gigantic size that came about, because this place was basically the land of the old gods, and so as such was prosperous for that reason. Something basically wiped them out, and without their patron deities to protect them, they quickly fell by the wayside and crumbled beneath the weight of without the assistance of their deities. And so they were basically quickly beaten back, and to the point where, yes, like I think it was like single generation, everyone had to either died or fled, and this area along the coast was the final place that anyone had any level of safety, just because it was on the very edge.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like, it's also kind of like being in this peninsula and like right along the coastline and stuff like that, you kind of have the benefit of maybe a more sturdy foundation, like literally and figuratively, because like you have access to water and trade and stuff like that, but also you've got more solid, like for instance, rocks and stuff like that under you, and the sand is not so deep and stuff like that. So yeah, you do definitely have like a more solid foundation, literally, to build this thing upon, where the shifting of the sands and the whatever, is going to have a much harder time sort of
Swallowing
breaking you down.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, what exactly caused these titans to fall is the question that doesn't, the answer that doesn't immediately pop into my head.
One of the beautiful things is that we don't necessarily need to immediately answer it.
Yeah,
because
fair
this
enough.
is in ancient history that probably a lot of people have, you know, forgotten and stuff too. And there's going to be stories about it, but we don't necessarily need to have an exact answer for it. Which is the beautiful thing about creating ancient history, is that it is going to be very, very differently represented in modern times.
Yeah, totally.
As far, like, I think there's something to be said about, like, just over time, these creatures have been getting more aggressive, have been getting more pronounced, and I had a thought.
Okay.
They could have done battle, right?
Okay.
With one of the mega ones.
Yeah.
You know, like the fire dragon in the mountains level, like big.
Yeah.
And kind of had like sort of a Pyrrhic victory where like you know, nobody really won. They like fended it off, but like with their dying last actions kind of thing before like they also fell in battle, and then were kind of just left with no deities, no protection, like you know, you no longer have the goddess of rain or something like that, and so like all of your crops fail, you no longer have the god of protection and stuff, like, you know, that kind of thing. And just so all of a sudden, like, you just are like wiped from the face of the earth, and the evil spirits and the evil energies and creatures and stuff like that are now able to just run amok, and it was just chaos for like a generation.
Yeah, like that was kind of similar to like the vibe I was going for. It's just like the Titans were in theory like always kind of warring with these things. That's kind of the idea of the one versus the other. This is a weird example that's not like, it's only sort of thematically related, but have you ever seen the movie 9?
That's the one with the little sack guy?
The weird puppets, yeah.
Yeah, but not in a really long time.
You don't really remember much about it? Okay, so in that movie, AI basically grew its own mind and warred against humanity, and the movie takes place post that. And in the beginning of the movie, like everything's dead except for these handful of sock puppets and this one robot dog that's like fucking 50 times their fucking size. It's the size of a dog, but still. That constantly hunts them because they're the last thing alive. But it's the only robot left as well, until the dog actually manages to get its hands on one of them, and then it kind of brings it back to the AI that initially built all the evil robots. Now, that idea, this post-calamity, both sides lost, and there's only this tiny little sliver of both remaining. I know we were talking in the desert about maybe there being like a huge snake and that being its sort of thing, but maybe thinking of this gigantic snake is actually only a small piece of the army that warred against it, and so now there's only this one civilization that really has to worry about it, and they're worried about it very very much, but it's merely a sliver of what used to be there. And so also sort of the idea of the fear that this thing could somehow wake up what it was once part of as well is also kind of a cool idea for me. I'm not sure if we want to go with a snake specifically. It's kind of the easiest one you'd want to go with in the desert. In history, the Titans warred with these creatures. Now, whether they're all snakes, who knows?
I had an idea.
Okay.
What if, in the same vein, somewhere out there, there is like one remaining Titan.
Okay.
And being such an immensely or maybe it's like even buried, but like nobody has seen this thing. But it is kind of just hanging on, and it's kind of taking it as its duty to keep this remaining gigantic snake also in check. So like that's kind of also something to do with why the sands are shifting, maybe, is like is kind of like keeping all this like moving towards the center, like all the sand's shifting towards the center kind of thing, to keep this thing like trapped and not able to get out to like the last city or to expand out and like go beyond like the borders of this desert and stuff. So it's like, yeah, it had to take out like pretty much the whole civilization to do it, but it's keeping them from falling to this as well.
That's kind of an interesting idea. I kind of like that. Yeah, maybe there were many serpents because there was like this king serpent. I hesitate to say god because it's one of these sort of leviathans, but yeah, it's basically a fucking god serpent or world serpent. And yeah, so yeah, this titan keeps it buried basically.
Yeah.
And again, all that's left of the immense army is this one comparably smaller but still gigantic by our standards,
or maybe
desert
there
snake.
are multiple of them, and like it's not necessarily the same one that you see, but they're so infrequent because they're being held back kind of thing. But I really like the idea of like at the expense of the human life that was here, they're still kind of locked in like a stalemate of like a forever battle, you know what I mean? And like people can't really reclaim this land because it's still entrenched in this conflict where like the final titan is keeping at bay the final leviathan that like, you know, controls or creates or whatever these snakes snake. But they're sort of just constantly locked in that battle, that stalemate, and so everybody else has fallen and you can't continue to expand into the desert because they're still there. But because of like the proximity and again also the more stable foundation, this one last little bastion is still safe on the outskirts there.
Yeah, no, that's kind of a cool idea. It creates a plot basically. Like you could also so easily see players like the sands are shifting more and more as time goes on, and it's worrying the people. Adventurers or someone makes their way out into the desert to investigate, discovers the truth about what happened those thousands of years ago, delves down and discovers the Titan. The Titan explains, but it's old, it's tired, it can't keep this going any longer, and so the serpent is slowly gaining more and more ground as time goes on, and then that becomes the plot. It's like, oh, we have to stop it. And so yeah, the idea that the serpent is also beneath the sands and it's like writhing and like trying to break itself free, but the sand itself keeps covering it up constantly. Maybe if it's not necessarily pulling the snake towards the center, but just constantly burying it, no matter like
that's kind of more what I was thinking anyway, but that's just how I could explain it, was like sort of pulling it around or like shifting the sands.
Yeah, totally.
So I totally agree with you.
Well, because that could be such a cool visual too, as just like you and your adventuring party or whatever are walking through the desert, and like just this crazy fucking sand earthquake happens, and you're like, what the fuck? And you see like part of the snake emerge. And you're like, what the fuck? Like just this gigantic dune or mountain-sized piece of snake, but then quickly it just gets recaptured by the desert itself. Like that's just such a cool fucking idea. I love that. It makes me think though, like so the arch motif that we were thinking about in the city, that feels like the arch itself would have to be almost a symbol to sort of represent the something to do with either the Titans previously or the battle or what kept them safe here in the first place.
Well, now that we've kind of expanded this a little bit, if this was at one point in time, and they may not even know this anymore, but if this at one point was a civilization that kind of like either worked hand in hand with these Titans or at the very least revered them, then that could kind of be like, you know, a door, a gate, or whatever that was built as like sort of like a welcoming thing. Like, hey guys, we built this big ass gateway to welcome you into our city, to welcome you into our civilization, whatever, that kind of thing. So it's a big ass gateway that they had kind of built so that like, you know, as like a you big ass Titan, it's a door in our city. Exactly.
Well, yeah, it's like a doorway.
Yeah, well, or welcome into like our lives, our hearts, or whatever.
Well, it is kind of in. I like that idea. Although it's like, oh, welcome to our city. I'm like, yeah, the city was probably built after the Titan. The Titans welcoming them, but also maybe it was some sort of technology that the Titans used. Because you did say that you wanted this stuff to be ancient, and a lot of it more ancient than others, and to do with this sort of previous civilization. Maybe these arches weren't merely symbolic, but they were built by the Titans themselves as some sort of tool, maybe even for transport. They could have been some sort of crazy teleportation gate that only they knew how to use.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I will say the only like specific one that I had in mind was like the one that kind of like shelters like the harbor. And there definitely could be plenty more out there in the sands from previous towns and cities and stuff like that. But that was the only one that I still thought needed to be like present in today, and we can still have more like, you know, at the outskirts of town or something like that. But I definitely do want there to be one sheltering the harbor.
Yeah.
Does that still work with what you're thinking?
Well, kind of, like, I mean, the fucking Titan's probably ankle deep for him. You know what I mean? But actually, I did kind of have another thought just now too. Like, what if maybe they weren't like some sort of teleportation gate or something like that, but maybe these archways were sort of placed like on one end and another end of like a city or area they wanted to protect. And so there is sort of this ward of or used to be at least this sort of ward within the archways that would protect them from the wind and harsh environments and sandstorms and stuff like that. Like crossing through the threshold of the archway into this sort of protected area, it gave people a reason to build there, because it was sort of an oasis in a bit of a way.
Yeah, that's a cool idea.
And so you can find these arches scattered throughout, but because the deities that basically powered them and used them as protection in the first place,
defunct architecture.
Yeah, exactly. They're just the pieces that remain.
Yeah.
But the people still revere them as protection in the first place.
Or maybe like every single one of these things lines up perfectly, and it turns out that they were just playing like lawn golf or whatever. What is that sport called? Like you get the mallet and the balls and the little archways.
Croquet.
I think croquet. Yeah.
Titan croquet.
Completely misinterpreted, like throughout history.
Therefore, our protection. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's incredible. But yeah. So the idea that people still consider them like symbols of protection, despite the fact that they are no longer technically protecting them, could also be a cool idea.
And they've also, like, at this point, at least the one in the harbor has regained some kind of actual protection as well, being that it like shelters them, you know, from probably more severe storms and also unwelcome visitors and stuff, despite them maybe not even knowing that they originally were used for protection. Like that one certainly still is at the very least. And I think that there also would still be like stories of ye olden times.
Well, oral traditions, like we kind of underestimate nowadays exactly how far along oral traditions can be accurately passed. Like the idea of the game of telephone, I think, has really skewed exactly how much we think, oh wow, well things will get screwed up over time. It's like, you can keep an oral tradition going for a very, very long time if people take it seriously enough.
Yeah. When you have actual storytellers.
Yeah, the idea that these things are for protection is at this point considered like the myth or legend, but realistically they were like, it's based in reality, and so people still follow those teachings. Is at least an idea for the arch motif as well. And so like maybe the idea of like crossing a threshold into the home is also sort of considered a cultural thing, because if you have this one in the harbor, and they would probably consider who to take in very, very seriously. Who are we allowing in under the protection of our gates? And it's probably something culturally they would take very seriously.
I like the idea that seeps into like the still modern day culture and stuff like that.
Yeah, totally. Either way, long-winded way of saying I think a whole bunch of Titans would be cool.
Yeah. No, that's cool. We were getting a good riff in there about just expanding the story for this place. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I've been thinking about this like the entire episode so far, by the way.
Yeah.
Apologies for people who are listening without video. But the way that we have set up these two continents, we kind of wanted it to be
kind of Pangea,
visually like they were connected at one point and then like split, like continental drifted away. And we've done that intentionally, we've done that thematically, we have some ideas about like stories and stuff to go along with that. I think it's really cool that we've got like the lush, fertile, like river dense area that at one point would have connected with the desert, and then like when they split away, all of the rivers were left here that would have one day continued into the desert, and then it just basically dried up because they all started on this side.
Yeah, interesting.
I've just been looking at that and I was like, that's really cool.
Yeah, no kidding. It just like adds a whole bunch of untold history to the
exactly. Also, actually, one thing I did want to mention, like, I don't know, 6 episodes ago, when we were naming cities there in Furos, I decided to use the like the prefix "al" for harbor towns.
Right.
I've been sitting on this one for a while, but like forever ago, I figured out why I was thinking, yeah, I've heard cities with "al" in it before. I've heard that regularly. It's because it's the Arabic word for the, or like from what I've gathered, it's like the.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a pretty frequently used word around the world.
Believe it or not.
Yeah.
It's pretty common.
Yeah, so just wanted to get that off my chest as I figured out where that word came from.
Yeah.
In this, it has a completely different context. It's not related to the or Arabic. Just wanted to say that for the record. I figured out why it was
for
in
the
my
record
head.
specifically. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
In the desert too, one thing that would probably be pretty cool, again, just visually, or like something that you could do just as something that happens as an encounter, is coming across like the corpse of one of these titans.
Yeah.
Or one of them being unveiled before you in one way, just a giant fucking hand.
Yeah.
Or like a giant, like, because again, I was picturing the titans in the desert a little bit like kind of Egypt theme, with like the head of a whatever. This like the freaking giant skull of a coyote attached to a human body or something like that would be so cool. But again, it's that shifting sands idea that kind of makes this place so cool. Is just like, you get brief glimpses into the past, and then it's just immediately ship brought away by like literally the sands of time.
That's like such an interesting piece of like storytelling that you can do in a game or a book. Like, is the idea of like, you know, your protagonist or your party or whatever is traveling, and just like the level of, it's such an intense visual to like have these enormous monuments sort of emerging from the sand. That is a huge like visual piece, a huge visual storytelling piece.
No, I love that. That gives me a pretty cool idea just on how to continue with the desert and stuff like that. At least we got a bit of an identity pinned down, so we'll probably wrap it up at that. Do you think?
Sure. Sounds good. Yeah, I think that's all I had to really say about it, and it feels good. I feel like we've done a good job there of sort of fleshing it out and making it feel like it's got its vibe the way we want it to.
A bit of an identity that we can dive into more later, for sure.
Yeah, totally.
Thanks for tuning in on this episode. Next episode, I think we'll probably touch on, other than the sort of amplification vortex area, I think the last one that's remaining is kind of the jungle nearby, and so we'll probably jump into that one after for the next episode, and after that it's who knows. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks
for watching the video. Welcome to the end card. We've got a couple of comments here as well. If you want to be featured here as a comment that we read, then make sure you leave a comment down below, and like and subscribe if you're enjoying what we're doing here. So I'm going to throw it over to Bill here for the first comment.
All right. So on episode 10, we have a comment from Bari Bars Boldia 197. And I'm going to ask for forgiveness immediately because you have a lot of names, and I'm not going to pronounce any correctly. So apologies. But anyway, firstly, happy 10th episode. Thank you. We appreciate that. Here's 2 holidays I've made. Officent is a Savan holiday where people honor not only people in their lives, but primarily the non-human beings in their lives. People get 2 days off to spend their time with their pets and family. This is also the time when most people who don't have pets will get pets, as arising riders will often choose their mounts and get time off on this time and get 3 weeks off to get to know their mounts, wyvern riders in parentheses. There's also the day of Silico, or Denazidu. Sorry. What do you think?
Denazidu.
is the day when followers of Silica Spewer or Stupid Miku people, the Stupid Miku people, celebrate the worship of Tartarus. That one's an actual word. Silica Spewer, a dragon that can spew black glass, and people often wear jewelry made from the black glass and go out into the desert at night and dance with a large bonfire and different draconic foods. I mean, the idea of a freaking dragon that spews black glass is some of the dopest shit I've ever heard in my life.
Undeniably dope.
That's way cooler than any D&D canon dragon. Again, apologies for pronunciations and stuff, but no, those are really cool ideas for celebrations. Just the Wyvern Riders thing is super cool, and it gives me just more and more ideas for what to do with the Griffin Riders over in Yothermere. And
I really liked Othusent. I think that is one, and I put this in my comment reply as well. I think that's one we could benefit from having in real life. Just a couple of days off to hang with the pets. You know?
Yeah, just like, just pet the goodest boys, goodest girls.
Shout out to the good boys and girls out there.
Not me. But yes, anyway, thank you very much for the comment.
So I've got one here as well that is from at Fleeces. Hi, your videos are very good, thank you, and I'm really enjoying the series, thank you. I'd like to make a suggestion. If possible, subtitle the videos, or at least put the subtitles instead of the automatic YouTube subtitles. Sometimes the automatic translation comes out strange and it's hard to understand. Thank you for the content. And then 2 hearts. First off, thank you very much for the input and the feedback, and saying nice things about us. We always appreciate that. Originally, I was worried that it was going to be hours and hours worth of work for our poor editor who already does hours and hours worth of work. But we actually do have something that's on sort of, the back burner. We're going to hopefully have that kicked out in the next couple of episodes potentially, which should allow us to do our own subtitles. So fingers crossed that we will have better subtitles for you.
We do need to see if this sort of system is going to work properly, so that this is in the works and still tentative, but we're going to see what we can do about that. So thank you very much for the suggestion.
Thanks for your feedback, and we're going to give it a shot.
So lastly, we have a comment from Atlas NL on one of our shorts. Penis Island on the top left. Good point. Thank you for the comment, Atlas. But yeah, again, if you want to be featured in the episode, comment, or you can also DM us on Instagram to possibly be featured as well. Remember to like us on Spotify and also Instagram as well. And thanks for tuning in.
Bye. See you in the next one.